24 tips you can use right now to improve your IELTS writing score. Hi there, I'm Ben Worthington from IELTSPodcast.com, and you may recognise my voice from other English learning websites. And in this podcast, we're going to focus strictly on the writing task. We're going to look at both, mainly on task 2 because that's the most difficult, and I'm going to go through 24 tips real fast. You might need a pen and paper just to write them down to make use of them. Quick piece of advice: choose 1 or 2 tips and apply them. Okay, don't worry about applying 24 tips right now because it's very difficult to do that. Take 1 or 2, write them down, use them, then listen again and grab some more tips or extract the most useful ones. Now, this podcast is divided into 3 parts: what you should know before you do the exam, the practice for the exam, and then what to actually do in the exam. Now, it's important to know what to do before the exam because I don't know if you follow football, but it's recently Pellegrini, the manager for Manchester City, he was told, I don't know if he was totally oblivious or if he forgot, but he forgot about the scoring system in the Champions League, and as a result he didn't encourage the team. He didn't go for a kill on the other rival teams during the knockout stages, and in the end Manchester City ended up in a difficult group stage. So what I'm saying is that you may think that you're aware of the format of the exam, but it's doesn't do any harm to go over it one more time. So I'll just go very quickly and I'll be sharing lots of tips as we go through it. So bear with me, and then eventually we'll get to how to practice and then what to do during the exam. Right, I'll go through this as quick as possible as well. So it's important that you understand the test format. Task 1 and Task 2, you've got 60 minutes. Depending on your ability with Task 1 and Task 2, you want to spend appropriate time. If you're having lots of problems with Task 2, maybe spend about 45 minutes instead of the generally recommended 40 minutes, and spend 15 on Task 1 or even 10 if you've got it under control, and then you can spend the rest of the time constructing the essay, which isn't an easy task. So let's have a look at the criteria. Task response, task achievement. Very important, very important. Make sure you've completely understood the question. If you can, classify the question. I'll go into that in more detail later. But read it a couple of times and make sure that you've got a good idea of what the question is asking. Sometimes a sentence or 2 sentences are written before the actual question, and that's just to distract you, so be aware of that. If you find a sentence that doesn't really correspond and you're thinking that's a bit confusing, it's there on purpose. It's a distraction. Like one of the tutors said on the earlier podcasts, the writing test is a reading test, and this applies especially when you're reading the question for the writing test, so be aware of that. Cohesion and coherence. Does the essay flow? Does the introduction mention the points you're going to use in the paragraph? Because it should. Does the conclusion reflect the introduction? Because it should. And just a quick tip here: in general, do not put any new information in the conclusion. It's not necessary. 3rd point, lexical resource. This is your vocabulary. What the examiner wants to see, especially for around band 7, 8, is topic-specific vocabulary. This means vocabulary that is specifically related to that topic. For example, if your question is about environmental problems in the Western world, don't say something like the air is bad in Manchester or wherever. say Manchester suffers from air pollution. And air pollution is a specific word that you're only going to find when you're talking about the topic of the environment. So try and find those kinds of words and make a note of them. And an extra tip for the band 7-8 students, those students aiming for that band, try and use your collocations. Your collocations are groups of words often found together. I'll give you some examples. Legal system, academic writing, higher education, crime rate, global warming. Use those collocations, and as soon as you find some, make a note of them, because they'll be very useful in your exam. I almost forgot. Grammatical range and accuracy. This is perhaps one of the most important, this is perhaps the most important point, because if you cannot write a grammatically correct sentence, then the examiner is not going to be able to read your essay, is not going to be able to understand it, so it's going to be almost impossible for them to evaluate whether whether your essay is cohesive, if it's coherent, and perhaps most importantly, if you've understood the question and answered the actual task, if you've actually answered it adequately. So be very, very meticulous when considering your grammatical range and accuracy. One way to get this under control is to get your essay checked, which you can do at my site, IELTSPodcast.com. But if you already know how to write an essay and you've got the other parts under control and it's just your grammar that's a problem, I'd recommend a good proofreading service. It's called proofreadmyessay.co.uk, proofreadmyessay.co.uk, and that's a good, honest service. It's quite economical as well, and they'll give you a free trial as well, so there's no risk in there. Have a look at that. Now, moving on, let's have a look at the general test. Task 1 in the general test. This is going to be asking you to write a letter. This is relatively easy because you're going to get a few bullet points, and each bullet point should correspond to a paragraph. Maybe you could put 2 bullet points together in your essay to form 1 paragraph, but you've basically got your plan in front of you. Follow those bullet points. For example, if it says write a letter of complaint, and in the letter you have to write bullet point 1, what happened, bullet point 2, what you expect to be done, bullet point 3, when you expect it to happen. So if you've got 3 bullet points, 3 paragraphs, job done. Use the correct language. If it's a formal letter, semi-formal or neutral. There's an earlier podcast all about letter writing. Just go onto the site and have a look for that. And that's relatively simple because you've even got the special letter writing vocabulary and phrases, dear sir, madam, please find attached, all those kind of sentences, which is, it's basically its own language, which you just memorize those sentences, job done. Of course, used in context. Now then, academic test, task 1. This is a little bit trickier, basically because there'll be a lot of information, very little time. Perhaps one of the most important points here is that you use the correct language. Yeah, if it's a line graph, you use the language of change. If you're describing a pie chart, you'll use vocabulary such as portion, section, share, market share if necessary. And then, especially related to bar charts, you want to pay attention to the tense. When was the graph produced, or what date does the information correspond to? Okay, and then use the appropriate tense, past, present, or future. Now, moving quickly on, we're going to start discussing the practice. This is what you should be doing for your preparation. Okay, practice makes perfect. You've heard that a million times. Hence, in the presentation I've said yawn, but anyway. This is important, and I'll tell you why. Because one, you need to get into the daily habit of doing this. Yeah, if you can write something every day, your chances of succeeding will improve significantly, especially if you're getting feedback, but more on that in a second. And yeah, you'll start using the sentence structures, the grammar principles. Just a side note here, if you've got time and patience and determination, what you can do is start writing out sample essays word for word, pen and paper, old school. And if you're looking for sample essays, go to IELTSPodcast.com, and there you'll find a sample essay section, and you'll find lots of sample essays to copy out word for word, and you'll start to absorb the structure. It'll take a while, but trust me, this works because I've used it for my Spanish. Now then, the next point, learn to generate ideas. This is especially important for task 2. What you need to do is practice brainstorming. You need to practice this because it's a skill that you need to do, that you need to produce in a quick fashion when you're in the exam. Okay, so you need to practice it a lot. How do you practice it? We do a lot of brainstorming. Okay, so when you see the actual topic, when you see the actual question, you need to start generating ideas. So that's why it's important. And then, of course, you organize the structure, these ideas into your essay. To do this effectively, you need a plan. If you go to IELTSPodcast.com, there you'll find a sentence guide which has a full step-by-step instruction process to go through, instructions to follow, and it makes it a lot more simple. But first of all, you need to have the ability to generate ideas. If you go to IELTSPodcast.com / there you can download 250 IELTS Task 2 questions. You'll also find 20 Band 9 sample essays in the same PDF. If you can generate ideas for 250 questions, then I promise you, your mind will never go blank again in any exam you do, especially IELTS exam. Okay, a lot of work there, but no pain, no gain. Let's carry on. So, another useful tip which you need to practice is to be aware of the question types. There's 4 types of questions for IELTS Task 2. Opinion, problem and solution, 2-part question, and discuss plus opinion. If you can classify these questions, if you can classify the question you've got on your exam paper, then you can take the correct action in order to get the full points for task response. Being able to classify it isn't that difficult, but depending on the question requires a slightly different response. I go into this in more detail in the sentence guide, and it's not the podcast to go into that right now, perhaps in the future. Next one, get feedback. Get feedback for your essays. You do need to be correcting them yourself, but it's not very reliable because in reality you don't know the mistakes that you're making. If you knew them, you wouldn't make them. So it's like a catch-22. You can ask a teacher, ask a friend, and you can also find people who've done the exam before and just ask them to have a look at your essay. Just ask them what's wrong, what's right. Be careful not to get too confused about it though. Okay, take every piece of advice with a grain of salt. And check that idiomatic expression on Wikipedia if you're worried about that. And a really good economical service you can use is with proofreadmyessay.co.uk, and they even do a free sample. So what you can do is just send your essay to them, they'll have a look at it, and they'll just look at the grammar side of it. But like I said before, grammar is perhaps one of the most important parts there. It is the most important part of the 4. So probably worth checking that out. proofreadmyessay.co.uk. Now, going back to the topic about generating ideas. You need to read. Go to the BBC, go to the Guardian, go to the Economist, go to the Financial Times, go to the Nature, million resources. Fill your head up with ideas and it becomes much easier. Read daily. This will help you pick up new sentence structures, new vocabulary, especially if you're actively reading. And this means going through with a pen or the highlighter or on the computer copy pasting and building a resource, building your own dictionary and writing down the words. Now, what's very common, unfortunately, is that students can recognize a lot of words, but they're unable to use them in their writing and their speaking. And this is common. What happens is that the words you recognize are in your passive vocabulary, the words you use are in your active vocabulary. So the trick is, not the trick, but what you have to do is move those words from your passive vocab into your active vocab. How do you do this? It's quite easy, really. Every new word you learn or you see or you hear should be written down and put in your personal diary, put in your dictionary, your own dictionary of words. Try to get the whole sentence as well. This way you can be sure you use it correctly. And then try and use it. Use it in your speech or in your writing. Of course, this goes back to getting feedback as well. Make sure you check it, that you've used it correctly if you're using it in your writing. As a side note, one very useful tip for acquiring new vocabulary and acquiring it quickly and efficiently is to use your ebook reader. Amazon Kindle have a good one. Kobo have an okay one. I've got a Kobo one. Bit of a pain, to be honest. But have a look at the Amazon one. Yeah, and the reason why these ebook readers are really handy because when you're reading the text, you can just double click the word and you've got the dictionary definition, you've got examples of the word in use, and if you're interested in linguistics and in etymology, you can find the root of the word or the origin of the word. If it's Latin, if it's Germanic, and all the rest of it. And another side note, and then I'll move on quickly. Sorry, this. Finding out the origin of the word, where it comes from, and the reason why it is like that, is helps you to remember it as well. So, moving on. Now, controlling the monkey mind. What does this mean? It means building your focus muscle. This is important because in the exam, if somebody coughs, or if something happens, or if the exam centre is in the city centre near a main road, which can happen, and there's going to be noise, there's going to be distractions, and it may harm your concentration. So you need to have, you need to be able to concentrate and focus. One technique is to go to, I don't know, a coffee shop, Starbucks, or university dining room and start writing task 2 or task 1 without interruptions and pure focus. If you can do it in those environments, doing it in the test centre will be easy. And this is just a small tip, but if you increase the amount of small tips that you're using, they're eventually building up and up. Yeah? This with the daily habit, what you do is you compound them and you just increase your chances. And for a lot of students, it's on a knife edge. They're so close to getting a 7, so close to getting a band 8, that little tips like these help you get closer and closer. And the reason why I'm saying do it in an exams in a coffee shop or a university thing is because you can get accustomed to it. And I'll just tell you a quick story. There's a book called The Art of Learning. The Art of Learning. Really good book. It talks about this, the guy, he writes about his own personal experience being a chess master and playing against all the chess greats. And when he was a kid, he used to play in these chess tournaments, and he used to play Russian students, Russian chess players. And what they'd used to do to disrupt his train of thought would be at critical points in the game, they'd give him a real kick underneath the table. And this would really offend him. His shin would be hurting, he would be distracted, and he'd lose his train of thought and his power of focus, and then make a silly move. And the examiner's not going to kick you underneath the table, I hope. If he does, that would be kind of cruel. But what I'm saying is that in the book, that this chess master later went on to be a taekwondo master. But anyway, this guy, he learned to be at one with the distractions. He learned to accept it and to go with the flow and take it as part of the game, and eventually overcome it and beat the distraction, which I think is important. Now then, learn your time management techniques. Wear a watch during the exam. Most of the exam sites and the blogs, IELTS sites, say spend 20 minutes on task 1, 40 minutes on task 2. That's logical. Maybe if you've got task 1 under complete control and you're having problems with task 2, maybe you should spend 10 minutes on task 1 and 50 minutes on task 2. The key here is to experiment. Do plenty of practice tests and find out which works best for you. Now, going back to the vocabulary, there's a quick tip here. If you want to increase your vocabulary, what you need to do is learn the suffixes and prefixes. This is a very quick way to increase your vocabulary, because if you put a prefix onto a word, then you've changed its meaning, and perhaps you've already got a list of root words that you know, and then you put these prefixes or suffixes onto the word, and it doubles the vocabulary. Let me give you an example. Well, the most common ones are out, as in outmaneuver, as in outgun, or as in reforestation, forestation, or or miss, or dis, or over. For example, understand, misunderstand, classified, unclassified, stabilize, destabilize, supply, oversupply, weight, overweight. You need to be careful though. Find out the meanings, because some of them mean the opposite. Some of them mean to do again, like reforestation means to do again, and over means like in excess. I don't know. George Bush is overweight, for example. I don't know if that's true. Maybe it is. I don't know. Depends on the Texas diet. Right. Now, third and final section. What to do in the exam. I've gone over these points once or twice. Maybe quickly, so I'll go into them in more detail now. With, of course, lots of tips. Plenty more tips. So, stick to the topic. Don't go off. Don't go off topic, like we mentioned before. Do not memorize your answers. If you need to memorize anything, you should memorize your plan, what you're doing, your process. If you don't have a process or a step-by-step methodology, you can find one at IELTSPodcast.com and look for the sentence guide, IELTS Task 2 sentence guide. There you'll find a complete process to follow. It makes it really simple. Your handwriting must be legible. Quick tip here to improve your handwriting. For the H's, the T's, the D's, the B's, the L's. You can extend the stem. That's the long part of the letter. And if you extend it, exaggerate it a little bit, and keep the other words, the other letters a little bit smaller, makes your writing look a little bit classier and easier to understand. I do this with my writing, especially for official documents, because my handwriting's a complete and utter mess. So I do this, and I'll also, of course, extend the G's, the Y's, the Q's. And this is a little tip, especially for those ones who are not completely comfortable with the Romanic alphabet. Of course, do not, when you're writing your essay, do not use your arrows or instructions. Your essay should be clean and should follow a logical order. If you've got a good plan and you've got a good process to follow, you're obviously not going to need all the arrows and instructions. Next point, step-by-step process to go through. This is just for the question. Now, when you got the questions, you need to spot the main idea, classify it, like I said before, underline the key words, start generating ideas and examples. We've talked about ideas and examples before, but having examples is important because they lend credibility to your arguments. If you don't know how to make examples, you can find a full tutorial about that at my site, IELTSPodcast.com. And if you sign up for the newsletter, you'll also get a whole tutorial dedicated to that, and on the YouTube channel. Now, stick to the word count. This is important. 150 words for task 1, 250 for task 2. A common question is, how do you know how many words to write? This is common, especially for the students that aren't that familiar with the Romanic alphabet. Quickly though, I'll just go through it. Count how many words you have in a line, in one line, and then multiply that by the amount of lines you have, and then you'll get a quick idea. After 3 or 4 essays, you'll start getting a general idea about it, so I wouldn't worry about it. Now, more advanced material now. Be concise and succinct, and avoid repetition, of course. So here we use different words when writing a paragraph, avoiding repetition, like I said a few seconds ago, using a logical order. Now, here's a good tip for being succinct. Avoid redundancy. Redundancy means when you've got a word that adds nothing to the sentence. I'll give you an example. I totally agree means the same as I agree. If you agree, it's 100%. So the totally is redundant. It's totally redundant. Sorry, my jokes just get worse. Anyway, I'll give you a proper example. Countless impoverished nations who basically lack money are unable to pursue a dignified life. This means the same as countless impoverished nations are unable to pursue a dignified life. What I'm saying is that we do not need who basically lack money, because it's surplus to requirement. It's unnecessary because we've said impoverished, which basically means a lack of money. So avoid redundancy. Check your essays for redundant words. Now, like we said before, keep your paper clean, good handwriting, organize it well. Good plan will get you through that. Don't use the words that are in your question. Try to think of synonyms. That'll get you points. And rephrase instructions using different ways. A good way to get this skill is to practice paraphrasing. Now, the almost coming to an end here. Revise your paper. This is very important. Very important. Because here you can pick up 5 or 10%. Now, the 3 most common mistakes a student will make when they're writing, and I can say this with 100% confidence because I've marked hundreds of essays, and the most common mistakes are third person singular, forgetting the S, plural singular agreement, people, are, men, man, women, woman, women, is, are, all of those. And the dreaded articles. In a podcast, one of the earlier podcasts, I think my IELTS teacher, she's called, she went through a really thorough way to avoid having problems with the articles. And finally, if you've been doing lots of practice and you've been checking your essays a lot, hopefully you've made a personal error list. This is just a list of mistakes you usually make when you write an essay that you personally make. And when you finish your essay, what you want to do is start right at the bottom and work up sentence by sentence, looking for those specific mistakes, correcting your essay so the examiner doesn't have to. This will give you 5 or 10% extra points if you manage to do it and do it well. Now, we've almost finished the podcast. I just want to say one more thing. Good luck to all the students taking their exam this week. Pretty certain you can do it, especially if you've been listening to the podcast. If you've got any problem, you're struggling with one certain point, send me an email, ben@IELTSPodcast.com or IELTSpodcast@gmail.com. Either of them will work. Send me an email and I'll reply. I always reply. I don't think, if I didn't reply, send it again. But I think I may have missed maybe 5 in the total time I've been running the site. Anyway, that's irrelevant. Good luck in the exam. If you need help, if you need any more help, send me an email and I'll be on it. So, thank you for listening. And remember, sign up to the email list, sign up and I can send you more information, get tons more, and more podcasts as well.